The storm had worsened, drenching the city in relentless sheets of rain that pounded against the streets with a near-deafening rhythm. Kevin pulled his coat tighter as the wind howled, lashing at his face. His umbrella had given up its fight against the storm halfway home, leaving him to trudge through the empty streets unprotected. He had stayed late at work another thankless shift at the factory, where time moved at a crawl, and his days blurred into monotony. Kevin's apartment was only a few blocks away, but the journey seemed endless in the downpour. The harsh glow of streetlights cast eerie reflections on the wet pavement, giving the world an otherworldly sheen. He let out a sigh, his breath visible in the frigid air. It wasn't just the rain soaking him to the bone, it was the weight of a life that had become far too predictable. No friends, no family, just the cold echo of his empty apartment waiting for him. As he rounded the corner, a faint movement under the dim light caught his eye. He stopped, squinting through the rain. At first he thought it was just a pile of discarded clothes. Then it shifted. A figure, small and shivering, was hunched over on the ground. Kevin hesitated, his instincts torn between concern and caution. Who would be out here, in the middle of a storm? He stepped closer, his boots splashing in shallow puddles. The figure didn't move. "Hey," Kevin called out, his voice uncertain, carried away by the wind. He crouched down, getting a clearer view of what or who was there. She wasn't human. That realization hit him harder than the biting cold. Her skin was a striking shade of blue, shimmering faintly like the surface of a calm sea under moonlight. Her hair, long and silvery, clung to her face and shoulders, plastered down by the rain. Her eyes, wide and glowing faintly, locked onto his, and he felt an involuntary shiver, not of fear, but of something he couldn't name. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice softer now. She didn't answer, only trembled more violently. Kevin scanned her attire, if it could even be called that. She wore what looked like a fitted suit, metallic and iridescent, though it was ripped in places, revealing glimpses of her strange yet delicate skin. Her arms clutched a small, glowing device to her chest, as if it was the only thing keeping her alive. "You can't stay out here," he said firmly. "You'll freeze." She blinked, her lips parting as if she was trying to speak. Instead of words, a melodic hum escaped her, a series of tonal notes that were hauntingly beautiful yet incomprehensible. Her voice wasn't human either. Kevin felt a pang of guilt as he realized she couldn't understand him. "Here," he said, taking off his coat and draping it over her shoulders. Her body stiffened at the touch, her glowing eyes watching him with wary confusion. Slowly, she relaxed, pulling the coat tighter around her trembling frame. Kevin extended his hand. "Come on, I'll help you." For a moment she didn't move, her gaze flicking between his face and his outstretched hand. Then, hesitantly, she reached out. Her fingers were cold, unnaturally smooth, and oddly light, like the delicate touch of silk. He helped her to her feet, surprised by how fragile she felt. "My place isn't far," Kevin said, gesturing down the street. "You'll be safe there." She didn't respond but followed him, her steps unsteady, as if walking was foreign to her. Kevin kept a cautious eye on her, noticing how she flinched at the sound of thunder or stumbled over uneven pavement. Whatever or whoever she was clearly out of her element. When they reached his building, Kevin led her up the narrow staircase to his apartment. He opened the door, motioning for her to enter. She hesitated at the threshold, her luminous eyes scanning the dimly lit space as if assessing its safety. Finally, she stepped inside, dripping rainwater onto the scuffed wooden floor. The room was small and cluttered, an open kitchen, a worn couch, and a coffee table covered in books and empty mugs. Kevin closed the door behind them, locking it out of habit, though he doubted anyone had followed them. "Here," he said, grabbing a clean towel from the bathroom. "Dry off with this." She took the towel tentatively, her fingers brushing his for a brief moment. Kevin felt a strange, electric jolt at the contact. She began patting her hair and face, her movements slow and deliberate, as though she had never used a towel before. While she dried off, Kevin rummaged through his closet, finding a sweatshirt and a pair of sweatpants. They would be far too big for her, but they were dry. He handed them to her, turning away to give her privacy as she changed. When he turned back, She was sitting on the couch, clutching the glowing device that she had carried with her. Kevin sat down across from her, studying her closely. She seemed calmer now, though her expression was unreadable. "You're not from here, are you?" he asked softly. Her glowing eyes met his, and for the first time she spoke not in words, but in those same melodic tones, layered with emotion. It wasn't speech as he knew it, but it carried a weight of meaning he couldn't quite grasp. She pointed to the device in her hands, pressing a button. A hologram burst into life, projecting an image into the air. Kevin leaned forward, his eyes widening. It was a ship, sleek, metallic, and unlike anything he had ever seen. The projection shifted, showing the ship engulfed in flames, spiraling toward what he recognized as Earth. "That's how you got here," Kevin murmured. "You crashed." She nodded, her shoulders slumping as if the memory pained her. The hologram changed again, this time showing a breathtaking planet, 2 suns hung in a lavender sky, and crystalline structures towered over lush, green landscapes. Kevin stared, captivated. Her home was beautiful, almost impossibly so. He looked back at her, his curiosity battling with concern. "Why were you here in the first place? Were you running from something?" She didn't answer directly. Instead, she gestured to the hologram, her melodic voice rising in a mournful cadence. Kevin didn't need to understand her language to sense the urgency in her tone. "You're in trouble," he said, more to himself than to her. "And now you're stuck here." Her expression softened, and she reached out, placing a hand on his arm. Her touch was light, almost imperceptible, but it carried a silent gratitude. Kevin swallowed hard, unsure of what to say. He didn't know what he was getting himself into, but he couldn't turn her away. "You can stay here," he said, his voice firm. "At least until we figure something out." She nodded, her lips curving into a faint smile. It was the first time she had shown anything resembling warmth, and Kevin felt his resolve harden. Whatever had brought her here, and whatever dangers might follow, he wasn't going to abandon her. Not tonight. As the storm raged on outside, Kevin watched her settle on the couch, her glowing eyes slowly closing. She looked peaceful now, but he knew that peace wouldn't last. For the first time in years, his empty apartment felt alive, but with that life came an unknown future, one that Kevin was strangely ready to face. Kevin stood in his small kitchen, staring out the window as rain continued to lash against the glass. The storm hadn't let up, its ferocity mirroring the turmoil inside his mind. In his living room, Lyra sat curled on the couch, wrapped in the blanket he'd given her. The soft glow of her skin flickered faintly in the dim light, a quiet reminder of how impossibly alien and beautiful she was. He set down his coffee mug, the liquid untouched. His thoughts churned with questions, most of them without answers. Who exactly was Lyra? Why had she come here? And what was she running from? Her holographic device and the brief images of her world had filled him with equal parts awe and dread. There was no denying that whatever brought her to Earth was bigger than him. Bigger than anything he could fully comprehend. He turned back to look at her. She was awake, her luminous eyes scanning his bookshelf with quiet curiosity. Her silvery hair cascaded over her shoulders, damp but glinting faintly, as though catching light that wasn't there. Kevin felt an inexplicable tug in his chest, a mixture of protectiveness and fascination. There was something achingly fragile about her despite her otherworldly appearance. "Do you need anything?" he asked softly. Lyra's head tilted at the sound of his voice, her glowing eyes locking onto his. For a moment, she said nothing, as if weighing the meaning of his words. Then she stood, crossing the room with movements that were hesitant but fluid. Her hands cradled the small, glowing device she had carried with her since he found her. She placed it gently on the table and activated it with a press of her slender fingers. The room filled with light as a holographic image materialized in the air. Kevin moved closer, his eyes widening. The projection showed a glowing orb, brilliant and pulsing, like a miniature star. It floated within a sleek, metallic structure that he recognized as her ship. Lyra gestured to the orb, her melodious tones rising and falling in a way that conveyed urgency. "You need this," Kevin guessed. "It's ... important." Lyra nodded, her expression solemn. She pointed at the orb again, then at herself, and finally at him. Her glowing eyes held his with an intensity that made his breath hitch. He wasn't sure how to interpret it. Was she asking for his help? Was she trusting him? Kevin exhaled, running a hand through his damp hair. "Okay," he said quietly. "We'll figure it out." Lyra's lips curved into a faint smile, a subtle but unmistakable gesture of gratitude. Kevin felt a warm flush creep up his neck. He turned away, busying himself by clearing the table of scattered books and papers. When he glanced back at her, she was watching him, her expression soft but unreadable. "You're incredible," he blurted, surprising even himself. "I mean, your world, your technology, everything about you, it's incredible." Lyra tilted her head, her silver hair falling like liquid silk over her shoulder. She stepped closer, her glowing eyes searching his face, as though trying to decipher his emotions. Slowly, she raised a hand, her delicate fingers brushing lightly against his cheek. Her touch was cool, almost electric, and Kevin froze, his breath catching in his throat. The moment stretched between them, charged with an energy that felt both surreal and deeply intimate. Lyra's fingers lingered, tracing the line of his jaw. Kevin felt his pulse quicken, a warmth spreading through his chest that had nothing to do with the blanket of rain outside. He reached up, his hand covering hers gently. "Lyra," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. Her name felt strange yet familiar on his tongue. She stepped closer, closing the small distance between them. Her luminous eyes flicked to his lips, and for a moment, Kevin swore he saw a flicker of uncertainty in her gaze. But then she leaned in, her movements deliberate yet tentative, as if testing the boundaries of their connection. Their lips met, and the world seemed to dissolve around them. Kevin's mind raced, but his body moved instinctively, his hands sliding to her waist. Lyra's touch was soft yet insistent, her fingers tangling in his hair as the kiss deepened. Her melodic hum filled the room, a sound that resonated in his chest and seemed to echo in his very soul. Time lost meaning as they moved together, the storm outside forgotten. Kevin guided her gently toward the couch, his heart pounding as she followed his lead. Her glowing skin shimmered faintly in the dim light, her otherworldly beauty both mesmerizing and intoxicating. He traced his fingers along the curve of her neck, marveling at the softness of her skin and the warmth that radiated from her. Lyra responded with a fervor that surprised him, her hands exploring his face, his shoulders, his chest. Her melodic voice rose again, the tones imbued with something primal and raw. Kevin didn't need to understand her language to know what she was feeling. It mirrored the intensity burning inside him. As their connection deepened, Kevin found himself overwhelmed by the sheer improbability of it all. Here he was, a man who had spent years locked in a routine of isolation, now entangled with a being from another world. Yet, in this moment, none of that mattered. The barriers of their differences, species, language, even worlds seemed insignificant. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Kevin rested his forehead against hers. Her glowing eyes searched his, and for the first time, he thought he saw vulnerability there. It was as if she was asking a silent question, one that went beyond words or translation. He didn't know how to answer, but he nodded anyway, hoping it was enough. The rain outside began to slow, the storm losing its ferocity. The room was quiet now, save for the sound of their breathing. Kevin cradled Lyra against him, his fingers brushing through her silvery hair as she rested her head on his chest. "I don't know what's going to happen next," he said softly, more to himself than to her. "But I promise, I won't let anything happen to you." Lyra's hand rested lightly on his chest, her touch a comforting weight. Her melodic voice rose one last time, the tones gentle and soothing. Kevin didn't understand the words, but he felt their meaning deep in his heart. As the first light of dawn broke through the clouds, Kevin closed his eyes, holding Lyra close. The storm may have passed, but the challenges ahead were only beginning. Yet, for the first time in years, he felt something he thought he had lost hope. The storm had dwindled to a soft drizzle, the kind that lingered in the early morning, shrouding the world in mist. Kevin woke to the faint sound of raindrops tapping against the window. For a brief moment, he thought everything was normal, just another quiet morning in his quiet life. Then he turned and saw Lyra. She was already awake, seated cross-legged on the couch. The faint glow of her skin was subdued in the soft light of dawn. She had the holographic device open in her lap, the image of her crashed ship rotating slowly above it. Kevin sat up, his muscles aching but his mind alert. "You're up early," he said, his voice groggy. Lyra's head tilted, acknowledging him with a faint smile. Her glowing eyes lingered on his face for a moment longer than usual before she returned her attention to the device. Kevin stood, stretching, and moved toward her. The hologram shifted as he approached, zooming in on a section of the ship. A new projection appeared, this time of a sleek, oblong object suspended in what looked like an intricate docking mechanism. "What is that?" Kevin asked, pointing to the device. Lyra's melodic voice rose softly, her tone steady but tinged with urgency. She gestured to the hologram, then to herself, her movements fluid yet deliberate. "You need it," Kevin guessed, frowning. "Is IT ... power? Communication?" She nodded, then hesitated, as if searching for a way to explain further. With a few taps on her device, the hologram changed again. This time, it displayed the same object, but with an ominous twist. Shadowy figures surrounded it, figures Kevin recognized immediately as the armored beings from the previous projection. "They're looking for it," he said, his voice lowering. "And if they find it first..." Lyra's expression darkened. She reached out and gripped his hand, her touch firm but not desperate. Kevin met her gaze, reading the unspoken plea in her luminous eyes. The stakes were higher than he had imagined. "We can't let that happen," he said, his resolve hardening. Kevin stood and began pacing, his mind racing for a plan. He had no idea how to recover something from a sunken alien ship, let alone outmaneuver whatever forces were hunting her. But sitting idle wasn't an option. Lyra watched him silently, her glowing eyes following his every movement. "What's the closest landmark to where the ship went down?" he asked. Lyra tapped her device, projecting a map of Earth once again. She zoomed in on a small island off the coast of the Pacific Northwest. Kevin frowned, recognizing the area. "That's not far from a military base," he said. "If anyone spotted your ship, they've probably already cordoned it off." Lyra's expression grew tense. She leaned forward, her hands moving rapidly across the device. The hologram shifted to display what looked like an aerial view of the crash site. Wreckage was scattered across the ocean floor, but the core of the ship remained intact. The glowing orb, still docked within the structure, pulsed faintly. "We need to move quickly," Kevin said. "If the military's involved or worse, your enemies, this could spiral out of control." As if on cue, a faint buzzing sound filled the room. Kevin froze, his eyes darting to the window. Lyra stiffened, her glowing skin brightening slightly in response to the sudden tension. The sound grew louder, more insistent, until it was unmistakable. A drone. Kevin moved quickly, grabbing Lyra's arm and pulling her toward the window. Together they peered through the rain-speckled glass. Hovering just above the street was a sleek, black machine, its rotors silent save for the faint hum of its propulsion system. It wasn't military, at least, not Earth's military. Its design was too fluid, too advanced. "They've found us," Kevin whispered. Lyra's breathing quickened, her melodic tones rising in alarm. She reached for her device, tapping furiously as the drone began scanning the building. A beam of light swept across the windows, pausing briefly on theirs. Kevin cursed under his breath, pulling her away from the glass. "We need to go. Now." Lyra nodded, her expression resolute. Kevin grabbed a duffel bag from the closet, stuffing it with essentials, clothes, a flashlight, and a few basic tools. Lyra worked on her device, her fingers moving with practiced precision. Just as Kevin zipped the bag, she held the device up, showing him the screen. The drone's signal. Lyra had intercepted it. "Can you block it?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. Her fingers danced over the controls, and the hum of the drone outside wavered. Moments later, it emitted a high-pitched whine before crashing to the ground in a burst of sparks. Kevin stared at her, impressed and slightly unnerved. "You're full of surprises," he said. Lyra offered a faint smile, but her eyes remained focused. She gestured toward the door, urgency written in every line of her body. Kevin slung the duffel bag over his shoulder and grabbed his keys. They moved quickly, slipping out the back entrance of the building. The rain masked their footsteps, but Kevin couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Lyra stayed close, her movements eerily silent as they navigated the narrow alleyways. "Where are we heading?" he asked. Lyra tapped her device, projecting a faint map onto the palm of her hand. She pointed toward the coastline, her glowing eyes meeting his with an intensity that left no room for doubt. That's where they needed to go. As they approached his car, Kevin's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, frowning at the unknown number flashing on the screen. "Against his better judgment," he answered. Kevin Steele, the voice on the other end, was sharp, authoritative. "Who's asking?" "You're harboring an extraterrestrial fugitive," the voice said, its tone devoid of emotion. "Turn her over now, and we might spare your life." Kevin's grip tightened on the phone. "Who the hell is this?" The line went dead. Kevin stared at the screen, his heart pounding. He looked at Lyra, who was watching him with concern. He didn't need to explain. She knew. "We're not safe here," he said. Lyra nodded, her expression hardening. She reached out and touched his arm, her melodic voice low and steady. Kevin didn't understand the words, but he felt the meaning. "Trust me." He exhaled, his resolve hardening. Together they climbed into the car, the engine roaring to life. As they sped into the rain-soaked streets, Kevin cast one last glance at his apartment in the rearview mirror. The life he had known was gone, but for the first time he didn't look back with regret. Their journey had only just begun, and the road ahead was fraught with danger. But with Lyra by his side, Kevin knew one thing for certain: he wouldn't face it alone. The air was heavy with salt and moisture as Kevin maneuvered the car off the gravel path and onto the deserted beach. The Pacific stretched before them, an endless expanse of restless waves beneath a slate-gray sky. The early morning light filtered through the lingering mist, casting the scene in an ethereal glow. Kevin cut the engine and sat still for a moment, gripping the steering wheel as his mind churned with questions. Beside him, Lyra was already focused, her glowing device cradled in her hands. The holographic map of the ocean floor hovered in the air, rotating slowly. Her glowing blue skin shimmered faintly in the soft light, and her silvery hair fell in loose waves over her shoulders. Kevin had grown used to her alien beauty, but it still had the power to catch him off guard. "How far out is the wreck?" he asked, breaking the silence. Lyra's glowing eyes met his, and she tapped the device. The map zoomed in on a cluster of underwater formations about 3 miles from the shore. Kevin leaned closer, frowning at the jagged shapes. "Those rocks don't look friendly," he muttered. "Is your ship in one piece?" Lyra tilted her head and hesitated, then tapped the screen again. The projection shifted to show the wreckage, a massive structure partially embedded in the seabed. Though the ship's sleek design was still evident, it was battered, with large sections torn apart. Kevin's stomach tightened as he took in the damage. "You weren't kidding about the crash," he said. "Can it even be salvaged?" Lyra's expression remained solemn as she gestured to the glowing orb at the center of the wreck. It pulsed faintly, its light steady and rhythmic. She pointed to the orb, then to herself, her melodic tones rising in a way that Kevin had come to understand as determination. "That's what you need," he said, more to himself than to her. "But it's in the middle of all that wreckage, and we're 3 miles offshore." Lyra nodded and tapped her device once more. The map shifted to show the route they would need to take, a direct path underwater. Kevin's heart sank as he realized the depth of the dive. 900 meters, he said, his voice tight. "That's not just dangerous, it's insane. Even if we had the equipment, we'd need days to prep for something like this." Lyra reached out and placed a hand on his arm, her touch light but firm. Her glowing eyes held his with a steady intensity, silently conveying her resolve. Kevin exhaled sharply and leaned back in his seat. "Okay," he said, running a hand through his hair. "I'm guessing you've got a plan. What is it?" Lyra's faint smile returned as she activated another function on her device. The hologram shifted again, this time displaying a sleek, capsule-like vessel. Kevin frowned at the design, then turned to her. "What is that?" Lyra gestured toward the trunk of the car, then back to the hologram. Kevin blinked, momentarily confused. "Wait, you have this with you? How?" Lyra's smile widened, and she stepped out of the car. Kevin followed, his curiosity piqued. As they approached the trunk, she tapped her device again, and the trunk popped open with a quiet hiss. Inside was the capsule, its metallic surface glinting faintly despite the overcast sky. The design was seamless, almost organic, with glowing lines that pulsed like veins of light. "You've been carrying this the whole time?" Kevin asked, shaking his head in disbelief. "You're something else." Lyra laughed softly, the sound like a musical trill that seemed to echo in the mist. Kevin couldn't help but smile, though his mind was already racing with the logistics of their mission. They had the means to dive, but time wasn't on their side. He glanced back at the horizon, half expecting to see something ominous materializing out of the fog. "Let's get this thing in the water," he said, moving to help her unload the capsule. The two of them worked quickly, wheeling the vessel down to the water's edge. The tide was low, and the waves lapped against the shore with a gentle but insistent rhythm. Kevin's muscles ached from the effort, but he pushed through, his focus sharpened by the urgency of their task. As they reached the water, Lyra activated the capsule. The faint hum of its systems came to life, and the hatch slid open with a soft hiss. The interior was compact but functional, with 2 seats and an array of glowing controls. Kevin climbed in first, adjusting his position as Lyra followed. "Not exactly first class," he muttered, earning a small smile from Lyra. Once they were seated, the hatch sealed, and the capsule shifted forward. Kevin braced himself as they slid into the water, the vessel cutting through the waves with surprising ease. The world outside the window darkened quickly as they descended, the light from the surface fading into an endless blue abyss. The seafloor appeared sooner than Kevin expected. It rose out of the darkness like a ghostly landscape, littered with jagged rocks and the scattered debris of Lyra's ship. The wreck itself loomed ahead, its twisted metal hull partially buried in the sand. Kevin swallowed hard as the capsule approached. "There it is," he said, pointing to the orb. It glowed faintly, nestled within a damaged section of the ship's core. Lyra nodded and began working the controls. The capsule maneuvered closer, coming to a stop just above the wreck. Kevin watched as she activated her suit, the metallic fabric flowing over her body like liquid. She turned to him, her expression serious. "You're going out there alone?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. Lyra placed a hand on his arm and spoke softly, her melodic tones carrying both reassurance and urgency. Kevin clenched his fists, feeling torn. He hated the idea of her taking the risk alone, but he knew she was better equipped for the task. "Be careful," he said finally. Lyra nodded and pressed a button on the wall. The hatch slid open, and a rush of cold water flooded the compartment. Kevin watched anxiously as she slipped out into the depths, her glowing form cutting through the darkness like a beacon. She moved with precision, weaving through the wreckage until she reached the orb. Kevin held his breath as she began working to free it, her movements quick but methodical. Just as she secured the orb, a faint vibration reverberated through the capsule. Kevin's eyes darted to the control panel. 2 new signals had appeared on the radar, moving fast. "Lyra," he whispered, his voice tight with fear. "They're here." He pounded on the glass, trying to get her attention. Lyra turned just as 2 dark shapes emerged from the shadows. Kevin's heart raced as he recognized the sleek, angular forms of her pursuers. They moved with predatory grace, closing in on her with terrifying speed. Lyra reacted instantly, activating a device on her wrist. A burst of light erupted from it, momentarily blinding her attackers. She used the distraction to swim back toward the capsule, clutching the orb tightly. Kevin scrambled to the controls, opening the hatch just as she reached it. "Get in," he shouted. Lyra slipped inside, water streaming off her suit as she collapsed into the seat. Kevin slammed the hatch shut and activated the thrusters. The capsule surged upward, leaving the wreck and their pursuers behind. As they broke the surface, Kevin exhaled a shaky breath. Lyra cradled the orb in her arms, her breathing labored but steady. He reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with awe. Lyra looked up at him, her glowing eyes meeting his. For a moment they sat in silence, the tension giving way to relief. But just as Kevin allowed himself to relax, a shadow fell over the capsule. He turned and froze. A massive ship hovered above the coastline, its dark silhouette blotting out the sky. The real battle was about to begin. The massive ship loomed above the coastline, its silhouette blacker than the storm-laden sky. Jagged, angular lines marked its surface, glowing faintly with pulsating red veins. Kevin's breath caught as he stared at the vessel, its sheer size dwarfing anything he'd ever seen. Waves crashed violently against the shore, churned by the energy radiating from the ship's engines. Inside the capsule, Lyra remained hunched over, her arms wrapped protectively around the glowing orb. Her breathing was shallow, but her glowing eyes stayed locked on the ship. Kevin could see the tension in her body, the quiet but fierce determination that had carried her this far. "What now?" Kevin asked, his voice tight with urgency. Lyra sat up slowly and tapped her device. The orb in her hands responded, pulsing in tandem with her actions. A new hologram appeared, showing a diagram of the massive ship overhead. Kevin leaned closer, trying to decipher the display. Lyra pointed to a section near the ship's base, where a faint energy field flickered. "You're saying we can get inside?" he asked. Lyra nodded, her glowing eyes meeting his. Kevin felt a surge of adrenaline, but doubt quickly followed. "That thing's the size of a skyscraper. What's your plan once we're in?" Lyra hesitated for the briefest moment before gesturing to the orb, then to the hologram. Kevin frowned, studying her movements. She pointed to a small core near the ship's center, her melodic tones rising in a steady rhythm. Though Kevin couldn't understand her words, the meaning was clear. "You want to destroy it," he said. Lyra nodded, her expression resolute. Kevin's chest tightened as the weight of her plan sank in. It wasn't just dangerous, it was suicidal. He ran a hand through his damp hair and exhaled sharply. "All right," he said, "but you're not doing this alone." Lyra's glowing eyes softened, and she reached out, her hand brushing against his. For a moment the chaos outside faded, replaced by the quiet connection between them. Kevin tightened his grip on her hand, his resolve hardening. "Let's end this." The capsule glided through the turbulent water, its engines humming softly. Lyra's fingers flew over the controls, steering them toward the ship's underside. Kevin kept his eyes fixed on the massive structure above, his heart pounding with every passing second. The air inside the capsule was heavy with tension, but neither of them spoke. As they approached the energy field, Lyra activated another function on her device. A shimmering cloak enveloped the capsule, blending it seamlessly with the water around it. Kevin's jaw clenched as they passed through the field, the capsule trembling slightly but holding steady. Beyond it, a gaping hatch yawned open, large enough to swallow them whole. "Is this normal for them?" Kevin asked, his voice low, leaving the door open. Lyra tilted her head, a faint smile playing at her lips. Kevin couldn't tell if it was amusement or grim acceptance. He wasn't sure he wanted to know. The capsule slipped into the ship's hangar, its interior illuminated by harsh red lights. Rows of smaller vessels lined the walls, their sleek designs a stark contrast to the hulking monstrosity they were housed in. Lyra guided the capsule into an empty berth, its engines powering down with a faint hiss. The silence that followed was deafening. "Here we go," Kevin muttered, unstrapping himself from his seat. Lyra moved quickly, activating her suit as she grabbed the orb. Kevin followed her lead, pulling a small pack of tools from the capsule's emergency kit. He had no idea if they would be useful, but he wasn't about to walk into the unknown unprepared. They stepped out into the hangar, the cold, metallic air biting at Kevin's skin. Lyra gestured for him to follow, her movements fluid and precise. Kevin marveled at her composure, even as the walls seemed to close in around them. As they made their way toward the ship's core, the faint hum of machinery grew louder. Kevin's nerves were on edge, his senses heightened with every step. He half expected an alarm to blare at any moment, but the corridors remained eerily empty. "Too quiet," he whispered. Lyra nodded, her expression tense. She tapped her device again, projecting a map of the ship's interior. Kevin studied it quickly, noting their position relative to the core. They were close, but not close enough. The sound of footsteps shattered the silence. Kevin froze, his hand instinctively reaching for Lyra's arm. She turned sharply, her glowing eyes narrowing as the footsteps grew louder. Shadows flickered at the end of the corridor, and Kevin's heart raced as three figures emerged. The pursuers. Their sleek, metallic armor glinted in the red light, their movements unnervingly precise. Kevin felt a surge of panic as one of them raised a weapon, its barrel glowing with deadly energy. "Run," Kevin shouted, grabbing Lyra's hand. They sprinted down the corridor, the sound of gunfire echoing behind them. Lyra activated her device, projecting a shield that deflected the blasts, but it was clear they wouldn't hold out for long. Kevin's lungs burned as they turned a corner, the core's entrance finally coming into view. Almost there, he gasped. Lyra skidded to a stop in front of the door, her fingers flying over the control panel. Kevin turned, his heart sinking as the pursuers rounded the corner. He grabbed a nearby pipe and swung it with all his strength, knocking one of them off balance. The others advanced, their weapons charging. "Hurry, Lyra," he shouted. The door slid open just as the remaining pursuers raised their weapons. Lyra grabbed Kevin's arm and pulled him inside, the door sealing shut behind them. Kevin collapsed against the wall, his chest heaving. "That was too close," he said, his voice shaking. Lyra didn't respond. She moved toward the core, placing the orb into a docking station. The room filled with light as the orb pulsed, its energy spreading through the chamber. Kevin shielded his eyes, watching as the machinery began to destabilize. "What's happening?" he asked. Lyra turned to him, her expression unreadable. She gestured toward the orb, then to herself, and finally to the door. Kevin's stomach dropped. "No," he said. "You're not staying here." Lyra's melodic voice rose, soft but insistent. She stepped closer, placing a hand on his chest. Kevin shook his head, his eyes stinging. "There has to be another way," he said. "We can find it together." Lyra's glowing eyes softened, and she reached up to touch his face. Her expression was full of sorrow, but also determination. Kevin felt his throat tighten as he realized she had already made up her mind. "I won't leave you," he whispered. Lyra smiled faintly, her voice rising in a soothing tone. She pressed something into his hand or device, still glowing with energy. Kevin stared at it, his vision blurring. Before he could protest, Lyra stepped back, her glowing form framed by the pulsing light of the core. "Lyra," Kevin said, his voice breaking. The room trembled as the orb's energy reached its peak. Lyra gestured toward the door, her expression urging him to go. Kevin hesitated, every instinct screaming at him to stay, but he knew she was right. "I'll never forget you," he said. Lyra's faint smile was the last thing he saw before the door sealed behind him. Kevin ran, the corridor shaking as the ship's systems began to collapse. He reached the hangar just as the capsule powered up, its engines responding to the device in his hand. The capsule launched just as the ship exploded, a blinding light engulfing the sky. Kevin stared at the horizon, his chest heavy with grief and awe. Lyra was gone, but her sacrifice had saved him, and perhaps much more. As the waves calmed, Kevin gripped the device tightly. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing: Lyra's legacy would endure.